Emma, we spoke to you just before we heard this 4-phase plan on Friday. But before we get to that, can I ask you about the overseas experience? I mean, looking at those scenes in London, at Wembley Stadium, in New York, places all over the world. And then here in Australia, we're talking about what level of vaccinated Australians we need to have to open up. What is the lived experience? What do we learn from overseas, places like the UK?
It's interesting, isn't it? Like last year, we were the envy of the world from our COVID response point of view, and now we're envying the world. So, yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Clearly, those countries have achieved sufficient vaccination to, I don't think they've reached herd immunity yet, but what they have done is vaccinate enough of the population that the numbers of people dying has dramatically reduced, and particularly targeting the elderly who are the most vulnerable. So I think we've got a lot to learn with that. It's all about vaccination and targeted vaccination.
So we have this semi-plan, but we don't have the modelling yet to back up what the vaccination thresholds will be. We keep on getting the number of eligible adults, not whole of population. Is there a big difference there?
Well, there is a difference, because if it's the proportion of eligible adults, that's a bigger proportion than the proportion of the whole of population, but only by about 10 or 20%, depending on where your eligibility threshold is. So I think we should consider the whole of population. And in fact, thank you for the segue, because in terms of the modelling not being done, the modelling from the Doherty is 1 month off, but my group has actually done this modelling, and we will be presenting today the results of that, which is that with the current plan, 85% of the population, that's the whole of the population of Australia, will need to be vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. And if we go for a slightly more strategic plan, that could be as low as 75%, but it's an awful lot of people who need to be vaccinated. So it's a big challenge ahead of us.
Wow. Okay, so Emma, Professor, your modelling says that it needs to be whole of population, including children, of which those under 16 aren't actually eligible for a vaccine yet here in Australia. And you're saying best case scenario, 75% of the whole population in Australia vaccinated to then allow us to do what exactly?
Well, that's the critical herd immunity number. So 75% is an absolute minimum if we do it really strategically, and that would be vaccinating almost all of the highly infectious group, which is anyone from about 20 to 60. And then of course we can allow for the fact that children are not vaccinated, and we could allow for slightly less vaccination in the elderly as well. But I think under the current plan, that the age-based vaccine rollout with AstraZeneca in the over 60s and Pfizer in the under 60s, we're looking at 85%, so 22 million Australians or something of that order. So it's a big ask. We can do it, but we've got to get everyone on board. Now, if we get to that point, that's herd immunity. That means we can more or less forget about COVID as a major public health problem. It will raise its head from time to time from people from overseas and so on, but it won't be a big issue, and we can certainly get rid of the masks and so on. But even if we don't get to that level, we can start doing things differently from what we're doing now, and particularly with people who are fully vaccinated, who have a much lower risk of developing COVID and passing it on. We can have different rules for different levels of risk. That could include things like
Emma, sorry to interrupt there. So 75% strategically, that gets us to herd immunity, best case scenario. But what do we start to see in terms of freedoms if we're at 40 or 50%? Have you done modelling as to, what level should avoid lockdowns, would keep our domestic borders reopen?
Sure. Well, when we're in that interim phase, we have to be. We can relieve some of the the restrictions, but we can expect if we do that we still have to, from time to time, if we're going for elimination, lockdown. But if we're not anymore going for elimination, then that's the crucial question. How much does vaccination reduce the rates of hospitalisation and the rates of death? That takes a little longer to determine, and we need, obviously that's work in progress. But I think what we need to do is think about stratifying risk. And if we, for example, insist that everyone coming into the country is already vaccinated fully, then we can certainly take a lot more people into the country than we are now and not halve the numbers of people coming into the country, as an example. And similarly, if you're fully vaccinated as an Australian, I have no understanding why you can't leave the country. Why are we being asked not to leave the country when we're fully vaccinated? That is something that really needs to be looked at. So with this 4-phase plan, I'm really pleased that it has occurred. However, there's a lot in it that's the detail is a lot of our freedoms are going to be reintroduced way too late in that plan.
So this modelling that you've done, is that based on the Delta variant or a combination of the Delta and Alpha?
So the modelling, we did some modelling about 8 months ago on the original Wuhan strain, and that's available in the public domain, and we've presented it to the Doherty and World Health Organization and other groups. We've now updated it for the Delta strain. So that is why these numbers are so high, requiring probably 85% of the Australian population to be vaccinated, because this Delta variant is so much more infectious and it's also a little less susceptible to vaccines.
Okay, so what is the difference between that original strain and the Delta variant in terms of the percentage of herd immunity?
The original strain, we needed about 60% to achieve herd immunity, and now, as you heard, it's more like 85%.
Okay, just one final question, because I've been talking about vaccine supply and how important that is, and we'll promise that this big ramp up would come in July, and now it's been revealed that, you know, we've been getting 300,000 Pfizer doses a week for a population of 25 million. And just to give our viewers some perspective, we did 150,000 vaccines as the high point in just one day last week in terms of jabs in people's arms. That will go to 500,000 and maybe a million by the end of July. It is still the fundamental problem, isn't it? It's not GPs being able to administer it, but the vaccines actually coming into the country.
Yeah, look, supply is the problem at the moment. And what's been really difficult is not being told where the supply problem is. And it really is, it appears to be that we just don't have enough Pfizer in the country to give it out. I don't think the down chain logistic problems are important at all. It seems to be just not having enough Pfizer. So really welcome news if we can ramp that up through July. That would be excellent.
Yeah, let's hope so. Emma McBryde, Professor, thanks so much for your time as always.
Thanks for having me back.